The thing about the Treats is that they were busy. Over a 27-year period, they had 12 children, starting with William in 1813, including with Valeria in 1840. In my search for Uncle Treat, I almost immediately discounted that he was a Treat, mainly because Miss Deborah Treat was 69 years old when he was born. If we trust headstone dates, which we don't. I like to use the Occam's razor approach in my investigating, but there's not always fun in that. So I decided to do my due diligence. And, there could be an affair baby. Spoiler, didn't find one. There could be an unlikely for the time much younger husband among the Treat girls. I don't know. But what I did find was a lot of interesting stuff. I found some of their personalities. And the best part, as a true crime enthusiast, I found Murder Most Fowl. So if you're interested in a deep dive into the life of a pioneering American family, this is it. So we're going to begin with our patriarch. This would be Jonathan Treat Sr. I found his signature. I'm kind of a handwriting nerd, so I always think that's cool. He was born in Frankfort, Maine in 1787. In family record, Jonathan was described as an industrious man of sterling integrity. He began his professional life as a farmer, eventually becoming a merchant for over 40 years. The beginning of a trend in this family. He served during the War of 1812. I wanted to concentrate my focus on this generation of Treats created by Jonathan, but I can trace this family back to the American Revolution, which is pretty cool. Our matriarch, Deborah Parker, she was described as having great natural abilities and a strong character. She had an iron constitution, enjoying all of her faculties until her last sickness. I do not want to fail to remind you that she had 12 babies over 27 years, so this woman stayed pregnant. Her last child was a daughter born to her at age 45 named Valeria Parker. She died at around 20 months old. Their oldest son was William. He is listed as a colonel on his headstone. He was born in 1813. He was married to Nancy and they had 5 children. Okay, then we have George, who was born in 1850. He was married to Harriet Andrews. They had 4 kids, including Ferdinand. And then we have Henry, who was born in 1817. So the thing about Henry Treat, Captain Henry Treat, is that his wives kept dying, but he was a good sport about it. He was first married to Abigail, then Caroline, then finally Alice. I have records of 10 children out of all of these unions. Henry was described as sarcastic and witty. He was intelligent and well-educated. He was regarded for his skills as a speaker and debater. He was called powerful in argument and happy in illustration. It was noted that he was a terror to his debate opponents. It was also noted that he was incredibly entertaining. He strikes me as like a swarthy old sea captain that everyone loved. James is the 4th son. He was born in 1819. He was married to Annie Kidley, a woman who proved to be very dear to this family, even though she bore no children. James took to the sea when he was only 15 years old, becoming a master mariner by the time he was 18 years old. He was involved in trade in the West Indies. He formed a shipping firm with his oldest brother William called Treat & Co. For a time, they were the largest importers of sugar and molasses in Maine. It was noted that Captain James Treat was one of the smartest men on the Penobscot waters. He had an impressive acumen for business with a great push and energy with all business dealings. Then we have Rufus number 1, who was the 5th child born in 1822. He lived to be 3 years old, and I can't find much about him, which is pretty common that I'm finding among lost children of the era. They kind of just bury and move on, unfortunately. Then we have Laura. Born in 1824, she was married to Adams Treat. The thing about Adams is that he was Laura's double cousin. His parents were the brother of her father, Jonathan, named Joshua, and the sister of her mother, Deborah, who was named Susan, hence double cousin. I found 3 kids of theirs. During her life, she lost 2 of her children. One is an infant. And I found that she died in the Maine Insane Asylum of chronic melancholia at the age of 79. I found record of her spending at least 3 years there that I can account for. Then we have who I like to call Rufus, Snowball 13 Treat. He was born in 1827. He was said to be an intelligent young man. He never married, and he passed away fairly young at the age of 22. And then we have Martha, who was born in 1829. She was another one that died very early at 18. I found no record of her ever marrying. And then we have father in the plot, Jonathan Franklin Treat. I found that he was commonly known as just Frank. He was born in 1831. I have found record that he traveled to California from Maine by ship in 1851. And back then, obviously, no Panama Canal, so he went all the way around Cape Horn. Frank's worst quality, I think, is that he voted for Franklin Pierce, which, if you want to brush up on your American history here, the guy was anti-abolitionist. He has a record of being a staunch Democrat in a time where Democrats weren't great. When he came to California, he originally expected to go into mining, but he ended up in the water business. What he did was he sold water to miners. Eventually, he and his son bought stock in a local store, and to this day, the store is still operated by his descendants. And I've actually traced the family tree down from Jonathan Franklin to the current owner, and I've picked up quite a few names in the cemetery as I came down, and I find that really, really cool. I'm also a family tree nerd. So the thing about JF, or Frank, as he was called, I feel like he was a little bit of a social justice warrior, and I'm fairly sure it was him working in the shadows of the newspaper to point out injustices against his family. I found multiple examples of him taking up for family members in distress, especially women. Case in point, in 1865, he traveled all the way back to Maine from California. That's not a short journey back then, not just a flight. He did this to financially bail out the wife of his brother James, probably also in reality James too. But I mentioned earlier Annie Kidley. She was the daughter of a large shipping family, and according to newspapers, she got herself into some tax debt, and an English brigantine was seized from her. That's a ship. They were all shipping people. So JF swept in to save her. This woman must have been very dear to him because he later gave one of his daughters the name Amy Kidley. So another thing I find is cool is when I can trace the origin of a unique name, and I can do that with this family quite a bit. So he served as a treasurer of Calaveras County for 14 years and the postmaster for San Andreas, where he is now buried. He was held in high esteem by the community. He married Julia, mother in the plot, in 1871. He was 40 and she was 20. They had 10 kids, including main character Mary Agnes. Next up, we have number 10, Edwin Parker. I found his signature too. If I had to have a favorite treat of this generation, Edwin's my guy. He's a bit of a Renaissance man. At first, he took to the sea pretty young at the age of 16. He worked as a clerk for his father for some time. He entered into a trade partnership with his father for some time, and then moved on to a partnership with his brother. They had a large store, they sold lumber, and then they engaged in some shipbuilding. Eventually, he went on to work in the legal field. In 1911, I found an article which reports that Edwin was staying in a hotel which caught fire, and he lost all of his books and clothes. He was married to Sarah Gordon Tyler. They had 2 children. One died in infancy. He is recorded as being religiously a latitudinarian. So it's a movement which encompasses the tenets of humanism, science, and rationality. It kind of sounds atheist-like to me. So I think he was kind of a dude who was a little bit ahead of his time. All right, and then we get to Ellen Maria Treat, who was born in 1836. She married into a very successful shipping family. I found thousands of pages of probate records. Her mother-in-law was worth the equivalent of around $6 million in today's money. Ellen's husband himself was worth around $1 million. She was married to Captain John Franklin Dwyer. They had 2 sons. When I began to investigate John Franklin Dwyer as a possible Uncle Treat, I couldn't find his grave. Instead, I found quite the story here. So John was the captain of a ship called the Tsarina, which was owned by his father in this shipping company. Something really cool that I found was a bunch of newspaper reports. They used to track the movements of ships. So they would be like, oh, ship's going here, coming here on expected these dates. So that was pretty neat. Upon looking through newspapers for clues on Captain Dwyer, I found an article entitled Awful Tragedy at Sea. So this article states that the Tsarina came back into port at Boston under the command of the first officer of another ship. And that would be because every officer of the Tsarina had been murdered by a crew member. A statement taken from a crew member named Shaw, who was noted as being a full-blooded Indian, straightforward and intelligent, recounts the ordeal faced by the people on the ship. Shaw stated that everyone liked the captain, but they held fear for this murderous crewmate who treated the crew badly. The problems began on the 22nd of June when the crewmate and the captain were bickering about the management of the ship. Tensions reached a new peak on July 15th when the captain and crewmate got into a fight at supper. This resulted in the captain ordering that the mate be placed in irons, or like handcuffed for the time. And the crewmate, as a result of that threat, pulled out a revolver on the captain. There was a standoff. The mate shouted, "Go away from me. Let me alone. I'm a desperate man." This confrontation was eventually settled without the crewmate being put in irons. Everything settled down until the 30th of July, when the crewmate seemingly lost it. Some of the crew were gathered around the wheel, some of whom were drunk. There's accounts in this, it's a very, very long article, but there's accounts that they're just like kind of hanging out with jugs under their arms and stuff, kind of just having a good old time in their off time. The enemy crewmate called to a man that was named John. He asked him to follow him, and the next thing Shaw knew is John was overboard with a hatchet to the head. Shaw went and attempted to rescue the man. The description that was given was like he threw a loose sail overboard, and that caused the crewmate, the murderous crewmate, to hack at the sail so he couldn't be rescued. He said, "You can go to hell with the captain." Then he struck the second mate with a hatchet and ordered 2 men at gunpoint to throw that guy overboard. Both of these guys are overboard in the water trying to catch up to this ship. And the murderous crewmate is standing there laughing at the plight of the men who would eventually drown. After watching the plight of the men in the water, he kind of went wild, swinging the axe and saying that he would catch the ship on fire and send the crew to hell. He ordered the crew to go retrieve the captain, who they found already dead with hacks to his head. They said that it appeared he fought. He had a number of defensive wounds on his hands. The crew wrapped the captain up in sheets and threw him overboard as ordered. Then the murderous crewmate, he embodied Kristi Noem, proclaiming, "I am the captain of this ship now. I will shoot the first man who disobeys. I will think no less of shooting you than shooting a dog." The men were ordered to work, and then they were put in leg irons for the night. The next day, a carpenter was able to hit the murderer over the head, they said with a maul. The murderer then chased the carpenter, who jumped overboard and was lost to the sea. Though it was a valiant attempt, and it gave enough of a distraction to the murderer that he was overtaken by other crew members who hit him on the head with hammers and eventually shot him, and he slowly died on deck, and then they threw him overboard. So the ship lost every skilled member of the crew. They had no way to navigate. All these guys were capable of was just taking the wheel. So they were adrift. Some other ships came upon them, and eventually they found a ship gave some excess personnel to get them navigated back to Boston. So that's the point at which the Tsarina came back to Boston, and this article was written. So I found out that I couldn't find the grave of Captain Dwyer because he was murdered and buried at sea. Captain Dwyer would be honored by Jonathan Franklin Treat, who would bestow the middle name of Dwyer on his youngest son.